There we go. All right. Thank you, everyone. Everybody seated? Do we have anybody on Zoom? We have Councillor Brown and Councillor Gezebrek. Welcome, both of you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the January 9th, 2023 Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we're in the traditional territory of the Snamo First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for the agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted authority to join electronically, and we've seen them here. First is the introduction of late items. Scurry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a few today. The first, agenda item 5A1, we're adding a PowerPoint presentation titled Affordable Housing Update. Then we have item 5A2, the addition of PowerPoint presentation titled BC Housing and City of Nanaimo Memorandum of Understanding, MOU Update. And finally, agenda item 5A3, the addition of PowerPoint presentation titled Temporary Emergency Accommodation Summary of 2021 Council Motions and Reports. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you. Could we have a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Eastmer, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Motion for adoption of minutes is circulated. Moved by Councillor Thorpe, seconded by Councillor Manley. All in favor? So passes. And we'll move on to Community Wellness Livability Affordable Housing Update. It's to be introduced by Mr. Dale Lindsay, General Manager, Development Services, Deputy CAO.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to all of Council. It's good to be back with you. Today is a session where we're going to focus specifically on the issue of housing. We have a few reports on your agenda to go over that. I think for returning council members, this might be covering a little bit of old ground, but it's an opportunity, I think, to bring everybody up to speed on a variety of issues that are moving forward with the city in terms of housing and affordable housing. So we had a couple of GPC meetings last year in 2022 on this topic, and out of that came some recommendations or directions from council in terms of our priorities. So we'll revisit those today and make sure everybody's aware of what those are. And then our intent today is that really you leave this with a good understanding of where we are with our affordable housing strategy, the initiatives that we've done, those that are on our work plan for this year, and what we'll expect to come back in front of either this committee or ultimately council for decisions in 2023. The second part is, of course, we have our existing MOU with BC Housing, and we're moving forward on the implementation of that MOU and the construction of those units, so we'll give you an update on that today. And then finally, with the discussion, there's been some recent discussions around temporary accommodations, or tiny homes, sometimes tiny villages, I guess sometimes they're called. So we just wanted to put the background reports on what previously had been received by council on that item. So those are the three topics, and at this point I'll turn it over to Ms. Brinkman and Ms. Wood, who are going to just have a very few brief slides to kind of walk you through the reports, and we're certainly happy to take any questions throughout.
Thank you. Ms. Brinkman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lindsay. So for affordable housing, so I'll be presenting quite a large body of work that either has been completed or we have been in the process of completing throughout the past year, and what we hope to bring forward in 2023. And I'm going to be skimming over the surface of a lot of projects, which actually take a huge amount of staff time. So I just want to acknowledge that we're just skimming the surface today. So the Affordable Housing Strategy provides guidance for affordable housing. That was adopted in 2018, so that has guided many of the projects that have been completed and that we are working towards. Also, the Health and Housing Action Plan, completed in 2021, provides guidance, particularly related to housing for our more vulnerable community members. And then most recently, City Plan, adopted in July 2022, provides guidance as well. So, next slide. So some of the completed initiatives are restricting short-term rentals. So that was a project completed in 2022 to protect the rental market by only allowing property owners to rent a portion or all of their residents on a short-term basis. More than 165 short-term rental business licenses have been approved, And the next step to consider will be enforcement of the non-compliant businesses with the goal of protecting rental units. In June 2021, we did updates to Schedule D of the zoning bylaw, and this was to provide incentives and increase the supply of affordable housing by offering a density bonus when purpose-built rentals or non-market rentals are secured with a housing agreement. So a density bonus allows for additional units on a property without a rezoning process. And further density bonus updates to Schedule D are proposed in 2023 for family-friendly units and adaptable units. The community amenity contribution policy was updated in 2021, and this increases the monetary contribution that a developer would pay at a time of rezoning. This policy also states that 40% of all monetary contributions be directed to the Housing Legacy Reserve Fund, and that will increase the amounts in that fund so we can use those for more housing initiatives in the city. Also, the CAC policy offers incentive for market rental units, and the CAC is waived for non-market rental housing when they are secured at the rezoning stage. The affordable housing strategy also directs the city continue to find ways for infill and intensification in neighborhoods. And so there are various initiatives that have been completed, including allowing secondary suites and coach houses in 2005 and 2008, offering a tax exemption for multifamily units in the downtown through a tax exemption bylaw, and then most recently amending the development permit guidelines such that a DP is not required for 4 units or less on a lot for most areas in the city. In 2023, we will look at doing more initiatives with regards to infill and intensification in neighborhoods, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Well, we're not delving into numbers too much today. Some numbers worth noting is that more than 2,400 multi-unit dwellings have been constructed in Nanaimo since 2018. More than 3,600 secondary suites have been constructed since 2005, and more than 250 non-market rental units have received a development cost charge reduction since 2018. So now to talk about some of the ongoing initiatives that we are currently working on and have been working on in the past few months. First being a housing needs report. So a joint housing needs assessment was completed with the Regional District of Nanaimo in 2020, and now we are in the process of just finalizing one that's specific to the city of Nanaimo. The housing needs report will be based on the 2021 census data and will be presented to Council in February. Completing a housing needs assessment is a requirement under the Local Government Act, and funding was provided by the province for this project. Also, we are working to better understand the family-friendly housing needs and accessible housing needs in the city. Both the housing needs report and a recent study completed by a land economist will provide guidance to increase the supply of family-friendly and accessible units. And in the spring of this year, we will bring forward recommended bylaw amendments and policy recommendations for this. Staff are also working with BC Housing to ensure the successful completion of housing developments on the 6 sites in the 2019 Memorandum of Understanding, and Ms. Christy Wood will provide an update on this next. Also, staff are working with BC Housing to negotiate a new Memorandum of Understanding to ensure there are more supportive and affordable units built in the city in the coming years. Also, one of the affordable housing strategy implementation items is to support a rent bank. And in 2021, $90,000 was contributed by the city towards that. And the city, a rent bank is a short-term prevention tool that helps provide housing stability for low to moderate income renters who are unable to pay rent due to life circumstances. And this program has been running through the nonprofit society Connective. And staff are working towards reviewing the successes of that program and will report back to Council in the spring with recommendations for funding and how to continue that program. So as Mr. Lindsay mentioned, at the June and July GPC meetings, affordable housing was discussed as far as what projects we should be working on in the coming year, 2023. In October 2022, Council endorsed a list of affordable housing projects for staff to complete. And 2 projects that were prioritized were, first one being to continue to find ways for infill and intensification in existing neighborhoods, and to expand opportunities for secondary suites and coach houses. So in the spring of 2023, staff will bring forward to council recommendations to increase the number of secondary suites and coach houses in the city, and will review existing residential zones in the zoning bylaw to find ways to allow for more infill in neighborhoods. The second priority was to complete an analysis of urban center and corridor land use designations in the new city plan, and then to consider pre-zoning appropriate parcels for affordable housing. And we will bring forward this project to council in the fall of 2023.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you, Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on this. If we already have secondary suites that we have a really good uptake on that program, how are we going to expand it? And then the coach houses, I know that we already allow them on a certain size lot, so are we looking at reducing the lot size requirement? Is that what we're looking at for those?
Ms. Brickman?
Yeah, through the chair. So one of the things we're looking at is our coach house and secondary suite regulations in the zoning bylaw to see if there's ways that we can allow for more. So like you say, right now there's certain lot size that they're required. So what are ways we can make changes to zoning bylaw to remove any barriers and to see if there's opportunities for more and where that's appropriate.
Thank you. That's helpful for coach houses. How are we going to incentivize secondary suites or expand opportunities for?
That's a good question.
Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah, through the chair, I think, you know, the one, I think Ms. Brinkman's already touched on it. Right now, you're only allowed to have one secondary suite on a property. So if it's in your principal dwelling, you can't have a detached suite. So one of the things that council may ultimately want to consider is, do we allow both a detached suite and one in the home? Some communities have taken that step, but that's one of, I think, numerous options that, you know, we could bring back. But off the top of my head, that's one that would certainly expand opportunities for secondary suites.
Okay, thank you.
And just for myself, could you say too, would it be fair to say that coach houses really fit the definition of a lot of tiny homes that people talk about?
I think when different communities use the word tiny homes, they talk about a variety of things, and often communities that talk about legalizing tiny homes are really talking about legalizing, you know, detached suites like we have done for many years and continue to do. They talk about using modular housing, which there was an amendment to the bylaw a couple of years ago that clarified you could use, you know, factory-built housing as your detached suite. So. Absolutely. I think when you talk about tiny homes, it's important to talk about exactly or clarify exactly what we're talking about, but sometimes they're used interchangeably with detached suites, is what we call detached suites.
Thank you.
So this slide sort of outlines the other projects that council had endorsed to be brought forward. Briefly, a review of the delegation bylaw to consider increasing the delegation of development permits for affordable housing. So currently the General Manager of Development Services and Director of Development Approvals can approve development permits of up to 100 units when variances are limited to 50% or less. And the delegation bylaw can be reviewed to perhaps delegate non-market housing development permits and supportive housing development permits. Also, the affordable housing strategy calls for a tenant relocation policy, and so this would provide guidance to the development community and staff and council to minimize impacts to existing tenants as a result of redevelopment of their apartment building or mobile home park. The Residential Tenancy Act has been updated to provide more protections to tenants, but staff will explore to see if there's more ways a municipality can provide assistance. We'll explore further density bonus opportunities through amendments to Schedule D to provide incentives for the types of housing needs in Nanaimo, such as family-friendly units and accessible units. And we'll evaluate a recent update to the Local Government Act, which removes the default requirement for local governments to hold public hearings for zoning bylaw amendments that are consistent with an official community plan. And we'll continue to find ways to educate the development community. So recent things, I know the current planning department has updated the rezoning process flowchart and rezoning application forms. One thing community planning department would like to do is a guide for housing agreements and how the process for those. So we're always updating our website, so there's lots of things that are ongoing that we do to inform the development community and housing providers about provision of housing. So just to conclude, you'll see an image on your screen. This is an image similar that you'll find in the Affordable Housing Strategy, and it shows visually the various types of housing needs in Nanaimo, from finding a place for the homeless to be warm in extreme weather, to supportive housing for those who may need support related to mental health, substance abuse, or violence, non-market housing for those who just can't afford to pay market rates, or to support people who maybe just are having trouble paying market rates due to a life circumstance, to market rental units, and then the provision of various forms of home ownership, whether it be apartment, townhouse, or single-family dwelling. And what we're trying to show here is that the city has been and continues to take steps to address all of the different forms of housing in Nanaimo. So, for example, the city's successful applications to round 1 and 2 of the Strengthening Communities Fund has allowed us to provide temporary modular housing for unhoused Nanaimo First Nation members. And also that funding supports 3 warming centers and a breakfast program for this winter. So many of the projects that I've been talking about, they're sort of shown here and show how, each project kind of tackles housing on one of the, in the spectrum, the housing continuum. Yeah, anything to add?
Through the chair, I think that's our end of our presentation for item 5A1. We're certainly happy to take any questions, but if there's no questions, we'll Ms. Wood will move on to the presentation for the report item 2.
Councillor Hemmons, then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. I'm curious about the density bonusing and the changes to Schedule D. Do we have any stats on the uptake of whether developers are taking us up on that? And then my next question is, do we anticipate with the family-friendly and accessible policy, are we going to see a great uptake, or are we just creating policy so that it's there if and when people decide to pull that lever?
Through the chair, so there's maybe 2 parts to that question, and maybe I'll tackle the second one first. So we'll present to you options with the family-friendly and accessible housing. As far as things we're thinking about potentially is in our multi-family zones, do we want to require a certain percentage of family-friendly or accessible units right in the zoning? So that's probably, and we'll let you know, explore what other municipalities are doing, if they're doing that, what the concerns are, or if that's been successful. Or maybe part of it is just at the time of rezoning. Maybe it's a rezoning policy, so at the time of rezoning, we're requiring a certain percentage of family-friendly or accessible units. And so that could be protected with a covenant on the title, or one of the things offered at the time of rezoning. So those are 2 options that we're considering that we will present to you, the pros and cons. And the first part of your question was, what is the uptake on Schedule D and density bonusing? And that's a good question. We have done that review. I don't have that information here, but certainly we can bring that forward when we're looking at amendments to Schedule D. You can keep that in mind.
Great, thank you. And one more, if I may. When we're looking at the public hearings, would we consider only waiving public hearings for nonprofit housing, or are we looking at waiving public hearings for all type of housing if it fits within Reimagine?
Through the chair, we will present the pros and cons of both to you, and you can let us know what you want to decide with regards to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you, if I may, a couple of questions to staff. Thanks, Ms. Brinkman. First of all, one of the very first points on your first slide was related to restricting short-term rentals, which is a relatively new policy which was adopted, I think, just under a year ago. And recently, Council had an email requesting information on that or questioning the rules around it. I know there is a guide, an operator's guide. Is that available on our website? I should know, but I don't.
Yes, the operator guide is available on the website.
And that would outline the rules and regulations around short-term rentals?
Correct.
Great, thank you very much. Secondly, I guess more of a comment than a question, but housing is such a large topic and has so many different components to it. And I think it's important to note that the city has for many years now attempted to address affordability in housing. And we have an affordable housing strategy, which we're continually building on, as you've indicated today, and I really appreciate the efforts that are being made on a number of fronts. So the continuum that you showed on your last slide, I think, is a very important one. One thing that's not on that continuum, and I'll invite comment if you wish, but it's mainly my comment, and that is supportive housing. Because the city has a role, in my opinion, in encouraging and facilitating affordable housing for seniors, for workers, for families, and so on. But when it comes to supportive housing, where mental health supports are needed to assist individuals, that becomes the realm of the provincial government. And when people talk about our, and I think it's a misnomer, our housing crisis, I think often that is what they're referring to. So I don't know if you wish to respond to that or agree with me or disagree. I'm sure some would, but to me that takes us into the realm of provincial, if not federal jurisdictions. And I'd love Mr. Lindsay to say, yes, Councillor Thorpe, that's exactly right. How astute of you to notice that.
To the chair, I guess what I would say is you're right in that many of our projects and many of the housing initiatives require funding from some level of government other than local government, either the province or the feds, to make truly affordable housing happen. Supportive housing has traditionally been funded through BC Housing, through the provincial government indirectly, and the city's role in that in the past, it doesn't have to be, but in the past the city has provided land in order to partner, but the capital does come, you're correct, the capital does come from the province.
Thanks, I'll settle for that. Thanks, Mr. Lindsay. Thank you, Ms. Brinkman.
Councillor Geselbrecht?
Thanks, Chair. Just a question. Do we utilize at all the health and housing strategy that was developed? And I was just curious in terms of, it outlined sort of the amount of investment that we needed per year to, address homelessness. And I'm just curious in terms of, what it set out when we received that report. How, are we measuring up to that degree of investment and development to address that situation, or are we falling short? And do we benchmark our efforts much off of that strategy?
Ms. Brinkman?
Through the chair, what I'm finding is that we tend to use the Health and Housing Action Plan, particularly when we're looking at the needs of the homeless. So as far as extreme weather shelter needs and supportive housing and more vulnerable populations is when we tend to draw on that plan. I know the Systems Planning Organization has been established to help implement that plan as well. So I don't know if there's anything
Mr. Lindsay?
to add.
The only thing I would add is it very, very much so is the data that's come out of that been the basis for our lobbying of the provincial government when it comes time to ask for additional emergency weather housing, when it comes time to ask for additional supportive housing or to ask for simply below market. We absolutely rely on those numbers, and those have been communicated to the province.
Follow-up, Councillor Geselbrecht?
Nope, thank you.
Councillor Manley?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'm assuming in this last slide that the CAC policy is the community amenities contribution policy, and is that, I'm not fully aware of it, but that means that we're just passing off those community amenity contributions for these projects, so that developers, is the city picking up the tab for improvements to street infrastructure like sidewalks and other amenities like parks and whatnot? I'm just curious about the policy and what it includes.
Sure. So through the chair, so the community amenity contribution policy, so that is a policy about the monetary or amenity contribution a developer would provide at the time of a rezoning application. So different than development cost charges. And so when the policy was updated, it increased the rate. So the rate was $1,000 per unit that the city used to collect at the time of rezoning. And so now an analysis was done, and so now there's an increase the January 1st for the next 3 years. And that increased money will go towards the Housing Legacy Reserve Fund to just sort of boost, 40%, of the monetary contributions go to the Housing Legacy Reserve Fund to boost that fund so that there's more available for
housing.
projects. Yeah.
Okay. And just to follow up, do we work with BC Housing, with Nanaimo Affordable Housing, other organizations that are doing affordable housing to defer development cost charges? How do we incentivize the building of more affordable and supportive housing in the community?
Through the chair, so for community amenity contributions, yes, we have built in waiver for non-market housing for those situations. For development cost charges, there are reductions in place in the development cost charge bylaw for non-market housing as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was adopted in 2018.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I do have one. When I was at the UBCM, I think it was in 2018, maybe 17, we had professors from Simon Fraser University said that our city policies are increasing housing costs anywhere from 30 to 20 or 30 to 50%. Can you comment on that?
Through the chair, I'm not familiar with that exact study, but we could always get back to council. I've seen recent studies that break down the overall cost of housing and distribute it over the cost of construction, the cost of land, and the cost of city charges. So that's possibly what they're referring to, but absolutely development cost charges, frontage works and services, all of those things add ultimately to the cost of housing.
Yeah, they said anywhere from 200,000 to 300,000 in Vancouver, so I was just wondering if we knew what our costs were, so. But not a problem, we can do that at a later date. Thank you. So we'll move on to our next speaker, which I believe is Mr. Lindsay, and that's on the BC Housing Memorandum of Understanding update.
And thank you, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Wood to walk you through this report.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Through the chair, I'm here to just provide an update with BC Housing and City of Nanaimo Memorandum of Understanding. So in 2019, BC Housing and the City of Nanaimo signed an MOU to provide affordable and supportive housing. The MOU, as Ms. Brinkman kind of talked to through the affordable housing strategy, commits to develop 7 projects across 6 identified sites throughout the city, and you can see them up there on your screen, to provide 140 to 160 units of permanent supportive housing in 3 or 4 locations, and up to 80 units of affordable family rental housing in 2 locations, and 40 units of affordable rental housing in 1 to 2 locations. And here's just a summary of the different projects and kind of the status of where they're at as well. So you can see that they're in various stages of planning and development. So 51 units of supportive housing are now occupied at 702 Nichols Street. And as you most know, that the project is operated by Island Care Crisis Society and was completed in March 2022. Currently, the craning of modulars for 51 units at 285 Prideaux Street is slated to start on January 16th, with the anticipation completion of summer 2023. And so Connective Society, formerly known as John Howard Society, has been identified as the operator of that site. And this site, just as it's listed up there, is a city-owned site. 250 Terminal, some of you may know, is the home of Newcastle Place, a temporary supportive housing site also operated by Island Care Crisis Society. And this site is owned by BC Housing. And BC Housing is proposing to build approximately 50 supportive units at this site, in addition to 50 affordable housing units. So a rezoning application is anticipated early in 2023 for this particular project. Formerly the site of Samaritan House, also owned by BC Housing. The site has been recently vacated to provide long-term supportive housing for our Sinamok community members, as well as other Indigenous members who are at risk or experiencing homelessness. A rezoning application will be brought forward sometime in the spring to council. And 1425 Cranberry Avenue is a city-owned vacant property, and BC Housing proposes to build approximately 46 affordable housing units We anticipate finalizing the lease in 2023, and more project details will come as other projects are completed throughout the MOU. 564 5th Street, also known as the Tutuxton Project, for some of our new councillors, is a collaborative development project involving 4 knowledge partners and includes the city, BC Housing, Sinemook First Nation, and the Nanaimo Ladysmith School District 68. The project involves a land use plan that prioritizes housing, recreation and wellness, and educational facilities on 3 adjacent properties in the Harewood neighborhood. And these properties are jointly owned by the city, School District 68, and BC Housing. And currently, right now, the project is in design phase. And once that's completed, we will receive a rezoning application anticipated in 2023. And this project proposes approximately 40 affordable housing units for families. In the report, you'll also see that while we've been working out to carry out the commitments outlined in the 2019 MOU, we also wanted to include some highlights of other work that's being funded by BC Housing, either they're recently completed or their current ongoing projects. So you'll see the table just above that was included in your report, and there are approximately 580 units where project work has been initiated or is under construction or are actually under tenant selection process. And the table also highlights recent completed projects funded by BC Housing. So 640 units have been completed and includes affordability that targets our very low income earners. So that's what we would call at shelter rates or rent geared to income, affordable market rates, middle income earners, and also market rentals as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's just a high-level summary.
I have Council Prino, and then Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just going back to the slide, just one before this. So sorry, one more. Great. So the one on where it's the 250 Terminal Avenue, the rezoning application anticipated. So from the rezoning stage to the actual construction stage to when we anticipate it will be built and ready for people to move in, how long are we looking at? Any idea? Not long, right? Not long.
I think the intent at this point is to continue with use of modular construction, so the same as we saw in Nickel Street.
Okay.
And what we're about to witness again next week on our property in the downtown here.
Yes.
So if they proceed with that same type of housing, it actually
It's
moves
quicker.
quite faster than on-site construction, quite a bit quicker. But I would still, given the process of going through the rezoning and where they are right now, I think realistically, you're probably looking at 2024 before we see,
24 months before. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question about the DLX on 3rd. It said this is a BC Housing funded project, but it says it's for middle income. What is the income range for that, and what are these units renting for?
Expensive.
Through the chair, we may not have all the information on each of these projects. These were provided to us from BC Housing, so we did want to include it to acknowledge the other projects that are funded by BC Housing. It's not just through the MOU, but I'm not sure we can answer specific questions on each of these projects unless Mr. Lindsay knows. No, so my apologies.
Okay. Yeah, I've just heard that they're rather expensive, not really considered affordable.
They're for middle income. They're for middle income, not affordable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of the affordable housing units we're talking about are really like for service worker income, and I think that part of the issue of people in our community get confused between supportive housing and affordable housing.
Yeah.
And affordable housing really, like if you're working at a grocery store or the coffee shop, you need affordable housing in this community now. What's considered affordable housing? I'd almost want to, considering what they do in Whistler, it's worker housing, and we need workers in our community, whether they're cleaning the hospital or serving us in the community.
Very good points. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, if I may, to Ms. Wood. Just a question in general, and I admit I am thinking specifically of the Cranberry Avenue site, which a number of years ago was the location of a very controversial proposal, which the council of the day eventually rejected. So we're involved in negotiating terms of a lease with BC Housing. Can you just comment in general on what I guess, power or leverage the city has when we negotiate terms of a lease as far as clientele for the site and future changes to the clientele of a site? And I'm thinking here as well of the comments that we've heard critical of Uplands Walk, where it was opened under one set of criteria for a certain clientele, and then fairly recently that was changed without any notice to us that I'm aware of, and has subsequently caused complaints. So when we negotiate a lease in general, do we have the ability to insist on certain terms, or are those basically at the mercy of BC Housing down the road? I hope that's a fair question and not putting you too much on the spot.
Through the chair, I would say absolutely the city has the ability to negotiate the terms of that lease and to focus on the types of housing that are desired. In this case, the Cranberry site under the MOU, it was identified for affordable family, if not affordable family, certainly affordable housing, but not supportive housing. So in that case, the lease would be specific to that with the to meet the intent of the MOU. At least that's the lease that we'd be working with them with BC Housing on. It would ultimately come forward to council for council's approval on that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Not seeing any further questions. So our next one is the temporary emergency accommodation summary of 2021 council motions and reports. Mr. Lindsay.
And we'll allow Ms. Wood to continue the role here. So.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lindsay. So at the December 19th, 2022 regular council meeting, council received a delegation from Ms. Delman on the tiny home project as a model for temporary emergency accommodation. And after Ms. Delman's presentation to council, council noted that in 2021, the past council of the day considered the provision of emergency accommodations similar to the tiny home project, or what sometimes we refer to as the Cowichan model. So I'm just here as directed to give you a summary of the 2021 council motions and reports related to this model. So on February 1st, 2021, council directed staff to explore options for implementing a temporary emergency accommodation program similar to the Cowichan housing model, noted just up on the slide there above. And on April 21st, 2021, council presented a report about the Cowichan housing model that included a whole host of information. So looking at capital costs, operation costs, opportunities for partnership, what kind of operations would be needed on a site as well. And it also had feedback from our local partners, so including our CMP, nonprofit, and of course the city's fire department also as well. Provided input on similar sites for what that would look like for an NIMO. And at that same council meeting, council directed staff to develop an expression of interest just to see operators out there who may be interested or have capacity to operate 2 emergency shelter sites, and then as well as to identify city properties that may be appropriate for this type of service. So city staff completed the request and reported to council as directed at an in-camera meeting. However, at the July 26, 2021 meeting, the in-camera meeting, council decided not to proceed with moving forward with the model and passed a motion to not proceed with issuing a request for proposal for the 2 cabin-style emergency shelters. Since that time, the city has actually worked to implement other models of temporary emergency accommodation, such as the supportive housing site at Labio Road, operated by Pacifica Housing Society, and the supportive housing site 250 Terminal, operated by Island Care Crisis Society. And since that time, more recently, through the Strengthening Communities Services Grant, as Ms. Brinkman talked about earlier, the city worked with Snuneymuxw First Nation to establish temporary emergency modular units on reserve. So the site is slated to have 3 fourplexes, so which will give you a total of 12 units, with each fourplex providing 1 wheelchair accessible unit. So if council wishes to further consider temporary emergency housing, including a tiny home model or something similar to the Cowichan model, we can look further by inviting maybe delegates or providing updated opportunities or updated costs at a future GPC meeting, if that's what council wishes to do.
Councillor Perino?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, the housing that we have on Labio, the supportive housing that you show a picture of, it is full accommodations with washroom, shower, and so forth. The tiny homes look so small to me. It says sleeping cabin. Does that mean that it actually has a bathroom or a shower or anything like that, or kitchen facilities at all, anything?
Through the chair to Councillor Perino. So each site is a little bit different, but the Cowichan model doesn't have washrooms. So they were using a portable toilet service and also bringing in water to the site. So they were having a water delivery service. Okay. Each cabin essentially just had a locked door, a window, and some heat provided.
And so the circumstances that we have currently on Labio and Terminal Road, are they how do I ask this question? Are they well received? Do people like it? Are you hearing good things, bad things?
Through the chair to Councillor Perino, can you clarify, is that, you mean like from a neighborhood perspective?
No, not so much from a neighborhood, but those that are actually living there, what they're going through. You know, does it meet their accommodation needs?
You know, we have working relationships with the operators. We, as a city rep, I sit on the Community Advisory Committee. And so those CACs, we call them, are attached to each of these supported sites, including Labio and Terminal. Yes. And the feedback we get from them is, you know, they're happy to be receiving housing, and you know, the infrastructure that they have in place is supportive for the service that they're offering.
Okay, the reason I'm asking the question, Your Worship, is that it's just the tiny house, just the thought of people not having their own private washroom to use when they need it, to me just seems so unreasonable, you know, so that's why I like the model that we currently have, and I just wondered if it was well received or not. That was why I was asking the question, so thank you.
Councillor Brown, and then Councillor Manley.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of points of clarification. First, Ms. Wood, I may have misheard you incorrectly, but the sequencing of events was 250 Terminal, and then sometime later, Council's expression of interest for something similar to the Cowichan model, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I misheard you then. And then the second thing is just in response to Councillor Perino. I think it's important that we get the housing typology right and the supports when we're talking about these things. So my understanding is the Cowichan model is targeted at a slightly different user group than sort of the more broad-reaching supportive sites that are currently in use in the city. So 250 Terminal and Labio are far more supportive and have different rule sets that go along with them than some of the other models out there. So they're designed to respond to different populations, not necessarily the same population or people experiencing the same type of homelessness.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yeah, the Cowichan model started off with tents and festival tents over top, and basically provided a place for people in small groups, 10 to 12 people, to camp out, and then replaced it with solid structures. I've heard that, you know, we don't have the land for the property for people to do this on, but I live half a block from Bowen Park, and I can walk 10 to 15 minutes in 4 different directions and find people camping near my home. And I've been to Bowen Park multiple times on, you know, cleanup crews to clean up after these camps. And, you know, there's not washroom facilities, so people are excreting wherever they happen to go. And it's problematic. We get it behind the arenas on 3rd, we get it up and down Bowen Park, we get it in the Butter Tubs region, we're getting it along the Parkway, and you know, bylaw has trouble keeping up with it. It's not a pleasant job for bylaw to be having to enforce the camping on public lands. It's not pleasant for the citizenry, and people don't feel safe going through Bowen Park. And I wouldn't advise my wife to walk through Bowen Park at night now. I've lived in that neighborhood for 20 years, and I can tell you that it's changed significantly because of that. And I do work with the unhoused population in the community, so I know a number of these folks, but it's not comfortable for other people in the community that don't know them. And we need to find solutions to help people who are, you know, pushed to this extreme. And we do see people who end up unhoused in this community because of multiple sets of circumstances, but the ultimate thing is that they've been evicted from where they live. So they may be seniors on low income, they may be people with diverse abilities, developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, they may be people with mental health issues, and they may be people with addiction issues and other circumstances. But we have a full range of citizens in our community that are unhoused. And I can go to different parts of this community and see cars that are parked there consistently, and I know that those people live in those vehicles. And a lot of the people that are living in these unhoused situations are living under threat of violence from other people in our community. They're living under threat of being moved along by bylaw and the RCMP. And so you know, I've read all this information. I've looked at the expression of interest. It's, as a, you know, somebody who's done this kind of work, I wouldn't say it's an appetizing expression of interest to go to that length to do something for a year, but there were respondents to it. And we have to find a way to be more humane about how we work with people in this community. And there's a full range. I know that there's veterans in our community living in the woods, and I know this from other veterans who work with those veterans, and part of what they're dealing with is PTSD, and so the models of housing and supportive housing that we have in the community don't fit what they need. But we need to be thinking about this and advocating and working with senior levels of government to make sure that this isn't just a problem in Nanaimo. This is a problem right across the country. And during the news reports about the winter weather in Toronto, there's thousands of homeless people in Toronto, thousands of them. So we're not alone. And this isn't just a West Coast phenomenon. It's happening right across the country. And we really need to speak out to senior levels of government that it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable in a country as wealthy as Canada that we have people living in our parks. And I'm not sure what direction we can give staff on what we can do about this. Have we looked into leasing, you know, parking spaces where we can set up a tent situation similar to what happened in Cowichan, you know, in downtown Duncan?
I'm going to suggest, Mr. Manley, or Councillor Manley, that we take this to a new GPC, because we have an agenda on here, and I think that was suggested by staff. So I think we should, I'll defer to Mr.
Madam Chair, I think this is all good. I mean, this is why we're bringing it back, these big topics back to council, is take a look at the landscape of all the initiatives that are underway and what's the history and where we're at. And the new council can take a look at this. So if you take a step back on this and say, okay, we want to adjust this or tweak that or spend more time. So you are having a strategic priorities workshop in February, and I'm sure housing is a very large topic. And affordability applies to a lot more people now than it used to, you know, just being able to get into a home, period, or affording a one-bedroom apartment at $1,500 or $1,700 is no longer affordable for a large number of people. So what I think using that diagram or a diagram like that and looking at each category and saying, what's our role in this? And advocacy has always been part of this and virtually every council's agenda, but effectiveness, we seem to be losing the battle in terms of as you've mentioned in Toronto and virtually every other city across the country in North America now, it seems to be the same. There's something not working, and ultimately they land on the ground. People are in need of housing options and choices, and families need 3-bedroom units, and people. So today, an exchange of ideas, get information to you. If you could collate some of those thoughts, bring it to the workshop that we're having with council, facilitated on strategic priorities, and maybe can dig into that, and then another session or two through GPC may cultivate some direction to council for the council itself vote on at a meeting in terms of additional projects. So there's so many pieces to this, and there's only so many resources that we and others have, so you really want to think carefully about how much effort you want to put into any type of project. And to get the return on the effort that's taking place. So I think whatever you want to say today or ask questions, that's what this is about. And then we can need to get a process so you can get to places where you're making decisions or entertaining motions and that type of thing.
Thank you.
Anything further?
No, thank you.
Councillor Geselbrecht?
Thanks, Chair. I just to add on to what Mr. Rudolph's saying, I think, my sense is that we are losing the battle. We haven't done a point in time count, but the amount of homelessness that we're seeing on the streets, it is staggering. And we've been discussing this for 4 years. We've got an SBO. We've got a whole slew of different programs in this, and there's this tiny home initiative that is something that could be looked at, or some form of it. But my general sense is that the degree of the problem, the effort by the province, the effort by our municipality isn't commensurate with the degree of the problem, and nor is the fulsomeness of our approach that needs to range from advocacy to mobilize the province that is responsible for the majority of the funding, to the coordination on the ground of all these disparate programs. And I think that this is something that's critical that we need to discuss at the upcoming strategic planning. And I just wanted to say right now that this is something that is really important for me to make sure that we address appropriately, and look at how we can properly resource and have innovative approach to address. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other speakers, I'll just add, I think that Councillor Manley hit on a really good thing, which is the working poor as well as our couch surfers. So that's something that we never address. We don't address those that are the level entry workers. And I think that's something that I would like to see talked about at a future meeting as well, because we only see, for the most part, the homeless we see are those that suffer from addiction and mental health. We're not seeing the true picture because they're not the ones causing the problems. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to our next one, which is, I just lost my whole e-scribe. Is there something else on?
Madam Chair, that's the end of our reports and presentations for this afternoon.
And now, okay, thank you. Question period? Nothing on question period? Okay, there's be a procedural motion that the meeting be closed to the public in order to deal with agenda items under the community charter. Section 90, sub 1, a part of the meeting may be closed to the public if the subject matter being considered relates to or is one of more of the following. E, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements, if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages and that in the view of the council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. And N, the consideration of whether a council meeting should be closed under provision of this subject or subsection 2 and Community Charter, section 90, sub 2. B, the consideration of information received and held in confidence relating to negotiations between the municipality and provincial government or the federal government or both, or between a provincial government or the federal government or both and a third party. So we're going to close the meeting now to the general public, so we'll ask everybody to leave that's not part of staff or council.
And Madam Chair, may I just have a motion, the mover and a seconder for the procedural motion?
I'm just going to get to that. Moved by Councillor Thorpe, second by Councillor Prino. All in favor? Motion carries.